Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue the general debate under item 5A of the agenda. I was informed that we will still have a rather long list of speakers inscribed. I would appreciate all of you observing the 3-minute speaking limit for your national statements. That way, you would help this conference exhaust the inscribed list of speakers. Without further ado, I now recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Georgia to make a statement.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to have the opportunity to address you on behalf of Georgia today and share with you the achievements and challenges of my country with regard to the promotion and protection of the rights of persons with disabilities. We are happy that Georgia, for the first time, has been elected as the Vice Chair of the Bureau of the CRPD COSP for the next 2 years, and we are ready to use this opportunity in order to further advance the protection of the rights of the PWDs on the international level. Today, 20% of the territory of my country is occupied by the Russian Federation, where there is a severe humanitarian situation. Due to the occupation, we do not have the opportunity to support disabled people living in Abkhazia and the Tskhin Valley region. We are implementing all available measures to address human rights abuses in the occupied regions, including by actively raising the issue on the international agenda. Georgia won several cases against the Russian Federation in the ECHR. Russia has been assigned responsibility for the grave human rights violations in occupied territories, including the rights of PWDs. Occupation doubly harms the situation of disabled people, especially underrepresented groups of PWDs. Therefore, we must unite our efforts against the occupation, the pain and harmful consequences of which are felt by the disabled people living in Georgia and Ukraine today due to Russian aggression. In March 2023, Georgia presented the initial report on the implementation of the CRPD to the Committee on the Right of PWDs at the UN office in Geneva, and we received the first recommendations. These recommendations are an action plan for our country, the implementation of which will not only protect disabled people, but also ensure Georgia's progress on the path of European integration. Georgian disabled people play the biggest role in the path of Georgia's European integration, and their voice must be heard. The main challenges facing us today are the reproductive and sexual health of women and girls with disabilities, the protection of the right to accessibility, especially digital and web accessibility, and the protection of the right of those at risk of cross-discrimination, including LGBTQ persons. Since the restoration of independence, we have...
Would it be possible for the speaker not to speed read? The interpreters could then do their job.
In the hotspots of the world. We have 300 servicemen wounded in international missions. Today, most of those soldiers are para-athletes, and within the Paralympic movement, they change the world for the better. Finally, today is a day of protection of the right of PWDs in Georgia. On this day, we do not congratulate each other, but focus on problematic issues, because we have the obligation to create equal opportunities for PWDs every day at all levels. And we must not forget that effective protection of the right of disabled people also ensures effective protection of the interest of other vulnerable groups. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Georgia, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Spain.
Vicepresidente.
Vice Chair. As you know, human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent. In other words, they cannot be dissociated. CRPD must be aligned with human rights and the enjoyment of a healthy environment. This is an issue that is essential in the 2030 Development Agenda on Sustainable Development. The participation of Spain in this general debate is geared towards drawing attention of all member states on the devastating consequences of climate change on persons with disability. And it's precisely due to our socioeconomic and health vulnerabilities. These effects are aggravated in the case of women and girls with disabilities, which are more exposed to sexual violence, abuse, exploitation during situations of natural disasters, especially in emergency housing. Spain is strongly committed to the climate crisis, and on this summit we intend to expand it to persons with disability through the following measures. By establishing a policy of cooperation that provides support to persons with disability that live in regions suffering from climate change. We need to promote green activism among persons with disabilities and their representatives. We also are incorporating universal accessibility in all efforts at awareness raising and training on climate change. The processes to rebuild areas affected by natural disasters must take into account the reality that we have persons with disability, and also we must review the legal frameworks to ensure that jobs and contracts are green and that promote the inclusion of persons with disability. We also need to establish a fair framework that provides incentives to individuals with disabilities when they use renewable energy and low-carbon products in order to promote energy efficiency in homes where people with disabilities live. Also, it's essential to ensure accessibility in protocols and emergency plans. We don't have a plan B. All of us are responsible for the sustainability of our Mother Earth. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Spain, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Greece, the permanent representative of Greece to the UN, Ambassador Evangelos Ekeris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Greece aligns with the statement delivered yesterday by the European Union, and I would like to make some additional remarks under my national capacity. The annual meeting of state parties to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is one of the most important international occasions to discuss issues relating to the CRPD. Having been ratified by 186 countries thus far, it is a convention with the highest number of signatories. The rights of persons with disabilities have been part of every forward-looking society and have been incorporated into the public policy planning at national, regional, and international levels. In Greece, the government has demonstrated political will and leadership in deeds by adopting in 2020 the first national action plans for the rights of persons with disabilities, which covers the period 2021 to 2027 and aims at long-term commitments and achievements. The National Action Plan reflects a human rights-based approach to disability, as well as the content and structure of the Convention. It also responds to the concluding observation by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities following Greece's latest review process, which was held in 2019 in Geneva. Seminal actions include the institution of the National Accessibility Authority as an independent body that advises the Prime Minister on issues of access and accessibility. The plan has also codified relevant national legislation and incorporated targets aiming at combating discrimination. This year, we are extremely honored to have with us the President of the National Accessibility Authority, Professor Konstantinis Stefanidis, as a panelist on Roundtable 2 to address the issue of digital accessibility for persons with disabilities. We would also like to express our appreciation to the President of the European Disability Forum and President of the International Disability Alliance, IDA, Mr. Ioannis Vardakastanis, who is also President of the National Confederation of Disabled People of Greece, the umbrella organization of the Greek disability movement. His commitment and dedication, along with his colleagues in IDA, to actively promoting the rights of persons with disability is well known. On a last note, I would like to mention that this year, Greece is honored to be participating as Vice Chair at the Bureau of the Conference representing WEOC. I thank you so much.
I warmly thank the distinguished representative of Greece, the permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Evangelos Ekeris, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Panama.
Buenos días.
Good morning. 16 years ago, with the signature and ratification on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and its optional protocol, Panama created a profound change of paradigm that reaffirmed that all persons with disabilities have the same rights in order to provide them to provide them with timely responses. With the establishment of the National Secretariat of Disabilities, we started a process of harmonizing national policies and strategies and institutional strengthening to ensure better coverage in its programs, projects, and services. Today, Panama would like to share the experiences that show the path we have covered and the coordinated efforts to promote public policies more focused to benefit persons with disabilities and their families. Among these experiences, first of all, evaluation and updating of national policy of disability and the National Strategic Plan. Strengthening the National Advisory Council on Disabilities, including in indigenous areas. We'd like to highlight financing of the UN through the joint program between OPS, UNESCO, and UN Women. We have a technical instrument with which we will carry out the second national survey on disability. We enacted a law that establishes neonatal screening that includes metabolic, auditive, cardiac, and eye screenings. With the European cooperation, we set up workshops to strengthen associations of persons with disabilities and their families. Through cooperation with the World Bank, we began elaborating a first national plan of universal accessibility. We have a platform of national registration of certification of disabilities. We're creating a Ministry of Women and the Directorate of Equal Opportunities to empower women with disabilities. We're implementing a security plan for persons with disability in emergency situations. We also have increased the number of inclusive educational centers and teachers to focus on diversity. In implementing the SDGs, we have set up a strategy of social responsibility, aligning efforts of the public and private sectors. In the midst of each effort, we are confronting social indifference and instability of governments in our region that limit the sustainability of initiatives that we're promoting. In this process, what will be necessary are adjustments in the management of inclusive public policies. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Panama, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Tēnā koutou katoa, greetings. It is an honour to participate in this year's conference. Aotearoa New Zealand is committed to protecting and promoting the rights of persons with disabilities. Last year, Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People, was established, the first in the world of its kind. Whaikaha is a Māori word which means being strong in our resolve. As a disabled woman, I am proud to be the Ministry's first Chief Executive. The Ministry is responsible for lifting the profile of disability and influencing better outcomes in line with our nation's founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Supporting other government agencies to incorporate disability perspectives into their work, transforming disability funding and support, implementing the Convention and New Zealand Sign Language Strategy, our Disability Strategy and Action Plan. Our Disability Strategy sets the direction for realising the Convention and was developed in close consultation with civil society. Its vision is that New Zealand is a non-disabling society, a place where persons with disabilities have equal opportunity to achieve their goals and aspirations, and all New Zealanders work together to make this happen. I want to acknowledge the work of New Zealand's independent monitoring mechanism, who, under Article 33 of the Convention, continue to monitor our progress. New Zealand continues to champion disability rights globally and supports efforts to remove barriers to inclusion. As co-chair of the UN Group of Friends of Persons with Disabilities, we have a strong focus on driving collective action to advance the full participation and empowerment of persons with disabilities. We will co-facilitate the biennial resolution on the implementation of the Convention in Third Committee this year, alongside Mexico. This resolution will focus on addressing the rights of persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. We call on all UN member states to support progress in this important area. We are working on initiatives to address multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, including for Indigenous peoples with disabilities. In the Pacific region, New Zealand provides core funding to the Pacific Disability Forum to support implementation of its strategic plan for 2021 to 25. Our shared efforts towards disability inclusion are a critical element of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in a way that truly leaves no one behind, at home, in our region and internationally. We recognise and support the important role that human rights defenders, civil society organisations and multilateral partners play in advancing disability inclusion. The voices of persons with disabilities were essential during the development of the Convention, and they remain critical to its success in implementation. Finally, Aotearoa New Zealand will continue our efforts to support the international community's shared ambitions to achieve the full realisation of the rights of all persons with disabilities. Ngā mihi nui, thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand, and now I would like to recognise and kindly invite the distinguished representative of the Disability Federation of Ireland.
Good morning, Pat Clark here. I'm speaking today on behalf of John Dolan, CEO of the Disability Federation of Ireland, who can't be with us on this occasion. It is nothing to die, but it is frightful not to live, as per Victor Hugo. Not being part of living, this is what violates our humanity. So bring on the responsibilities, the hard choices, the challenges, the joy, and the fear, all of the emotions. Bring it on, we say. The Nazis willfully slaughtered 300,000 disabled people, describing them as a life not worth of living. This alone was enough for the United Nations to agree the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. But 6 decades later, the UN finally produces an implementation plan for disabled people, this present Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Put simply, the world, our nations, had not sufficiently enhanced the humanity and the capacity of disabled people. The implementation of the CRPD is what we as disabled citizens, note citizens, because we are citizens, and that is what we need to be fulfilled. An occasional chink of light entering our place of confinement is just not simply good enough. Commitments need implementation. As disabled people, we yearn to be in the thick of life, not on the sidelines. The good times, the tough times, the exhilaration, the spontaneity, the adrenaline pumping, and the living the good life. Most of all, being part of it, part and parcel with everyone else. We disabled people and our organisations of persons with disabilities are ready to play our part in responding to the great challenges and opportunities ahead in collaboration and in the spirit of partnership, because this is what is required of us all. Only full participation vindicates our humanity. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of the Disability Federation of Ireland, and I would like now to recognise and kindly invite the distinguished representative of the Commonwealth Secretariat.
Mr. Chair, it is my pleasure to address the Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on behalf of the Commonwealth Secretariat. We welcome the theme of this year's meeting on harmonising national policies and strategies with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It mirrors the importance attached to protecting the rights of persons with disabilities by the Commonwealth member countries, whose heads of government urged implementation of the Convention and promoted alignment of relevant policies with its provisions at their 2022 meeting in Rwanda. With the meaningful participation and inclusion of persons with disabilities, the Commonwealth Secretariat supports member countries to harmonise their national frameworks with the Convention, and this includes providing guidance on national policies, capacity building, and assistance with legislative review processes. We engage a wide array of stakeholders such as government ministries, the police and prison services, election management bodies, and national human rights institutions. We also work to raise awareness in member countries about the practical means of addressing key issues affecting persons with disabilities, such as environmental harm. Many Commonwealth members are small island states vulnerable to climate change, biodiversity loss, and natural disasters, and we encourage members to adopt, through participatory processes, inclusive climate action strategies that address the particular challenges and environmental harms posed to persons with disabilities. An intersectional approach that accounts for the multiple vulnerabilities that persons with disabilities may encounter is absolutely crucial, and we emphasise this in all of our work and strive to mainstream disability inclusion in all of our programmes. For instance, we provide technical assistance to our governments on inclusion and gender equality. We ensure the issue of disability rights is on the agenda at our ministerial meetings, and we always make sure that we address other intersectional issues relating to disability from within the Commonwealth more generally. Mr. Chair, we have to respect the dignity and equality of all citizens in the Commonwealth and beyond. Effective implementation of the Convention is central to this objective. The Commonwealth Secretariat remains resolute in supporting member countries to give effect to the Convention and build disability-inclusive societies. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of the Commonwealth Secretariat. And now I would like to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Chile.
Chile ratified the CRPD in 2008, together with its optional protocol, and in 2010 enacted a law that created the National Service on Disability. This service has put focus on inclusion and how important it is to improve the quality of life of some 2,700,000 persons with disability in our country, according to the 2022 survey. We're also drafting a series of policies, programs, and initiatives that are aimed at benefiting persons with disability. President Gabriel Boric proposed to our service to expand this approach. Our horizon is to promote the comprehensive development of persons with disability in all areas and phases of their lives so that they can achieve an effective inclusion to lead their lives autonomously and independently. This is included in the National System of Care, where our service provides support and assistance to persons with disability to ensure their independence. Just a few milestones and achievements for 2022. 2022, we completed the participatory process with the participation of persons with disability. We elaborated a national plan for universal accessibility. It's a 10-year plan. It will make it possible to significantly improve universal accessibility in physical spaces and communications and information and in public services by applying the principles of universal design, so that all persons can use them safely, securely, and independently of their level of mobility, understanding, and any other aspect. On the 2nd of March 2023, we enacted a law on which seeks to ensure that in the social sphere and in education, disabled persons have the same opportunities. These new standards will be implemented. In December of 2022, we began the second report of the state of Chile regarding compliance with Convention on the Rights of Disabled Persons. For the period 2016-2022, this was done through a participatory process with advisory councils of civil society and with the participation of Foreign Ministry, Ministry of Social Development, and other public bodies. Also, we conducted the National Survey of Disability and Dependence to better understand situations of disability and to target those who need specific support. We also established an academy with a system of training, free online training that made it possible to some 7,500 civil servants to get training on topics of universal accessibility, web accessibility, and others. This was recognized by the International Zero Project in Vienna as an initiative of international interest for inclusion of persons with disability. It is expected that in 2023 it will train some 2,700 persons. We're currently discussing legal changes to strengthen labor inclusion of persons with disability. In 2021 and 2022, our service and the University of Chile developed a campaign, Let Us Discuss Disability and Sexuality, in order to contribute to the effective exercise and promotion of sexual and reproductive rights of persons, in particular women with disability. This included the participation of persons with disability and the elaboration and validation of their contents. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Chile. And now I would like to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, please, this conference is focusing on national policies and strategies with regard to the CRPD, as outlined by the Common Declaration of Groups of Friends of Persons with Disabilities, which we are a member of. The persons with disabilities cannot be fully implemented unless they are firmly enshrined in the national legal and political framework. We need a long-term strategy given the specific needs for action. It's true that respect for the rights of persons with disabilities require their full implementation under ordinary circumstances. However, we should pay special attention to their implementation during crises, whether it comes to armed conflict or public health crises. Unfortunately, those living with disabilities are often the forgotten victims of armed conflicts. The actors involved usually ignore the disproportionate impact of armed conflicts on these people. Disabilities are often considered to be a niche topic when it comes to conflict. We hope that this conference will provide sufficient space for discussion of this topic. It's therefore extremely important to reaffirm the importance of persons living with disabilities at the national level when it comes to human rights, as well as international humanitarian law, including for humanitarian aid. What's most important is to integrate those rights in laws, policies, and national directives. This implementation can only be carried out if it's based on the concrete experience of those living with disabilities. Here, Switzerland would like to thank the committee of the CRPG with regard to its general comment on Article 11 of the CRPG, and encourages states and international organizations to follow that example, to follow that with interest. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Israel.
Thank you, Chair. The Equal Rights for Persons with Disabilities law in Israel was initially enacted in 1998, together with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was ratified in Israel by 2012. They establish a human-based approach to disabilities that aims to prevent and uproot discrimination and bring about an inclusive society in which no person is left behind. During the past years, the Commission for Equal Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Israel has put endless efforts into changing attitudes and raising awareness that have yielded remarkable success. Subsequently, public awareness and inclusion in Israel are now significantly greater than at any point in the past. However, in order to reach the goal of full inclusion in terms of real necessary change, strong laws must be legislated and enforced. During this past year, we have passed a major amendment to our law, which gives our Commission the authority to enforce accessibility using financial sanctions instead of only criminal measures. This amendment also gives us the authority to file lawsuits on behalf of individuals in cases of violation of accessibility requirements and discrimination. We have executed inspections of adequate representation compliance in 73 different public entities. We have taken major steps to promote equal rights of persons with disabilities among specific population groups in Israel, mainly the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox. We have executed approximately 500 accessibility inspections. We have been active in the legal front, filing civil lawsuits and consulting in numerous cases. We have established a substantial and meaningful participation at international forums and UN mechanisms, including a key participation at the CRPD review this coming summer at the UN in Geneva. We have passed a major legislation, the Social Services for Persons with Disabilities Law. We have expanded the exemption of people with disabilities to wait in line and from the need to pay for a supporting companion. We are working on regulations for evacuations of persons with disabilities in emergency situations, cohesive with the work of Special Rapporteur Quinn. We have advanced the regulations for accessible election procedures. We have advanced the right of persons with disabilities to parenthood. We are in the final stages of expanding the adequate representation requirement to include government-owned companies. We are improving accessibility regulations in additional major areas such as cultural and sports events, healthcare, public transportation, communications and internet, and education. We are advancing legislation aimed at shifting away from sheltered employment towards greater employment of people with disabilities in the open market. The State of Israel is fully committed to the sacred goal of protecting and advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. Continuing to work together is crucial for achieving our universal common goal of full and equal rights to everyone in our societies. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Israel, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Slovakia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Slovakia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the representative of the EU and would like to make some additional remarks in its national capacity. We appreciate the main topic of this year's conference focused on harmonizing national policies and strategies with the CRPD. Despite some progress made, we are still far from ensuring that persons with disabilities can fully enjoy their rights. On contrary, challenges we are facing today, including several conflicts, COVID-19 pandemic consequences, climate change, or socio-economic instability, have even exacerbated the already unfavorable situation, deepening the risk of poverty or restricting access to basic health care services guaranteed. Slovakia pays a significant attention to the issue of promotion and protection of human rights of persons with disabilities. The aim of the national program for the development of the living conditions of persons with disabilities for 2021-2030, adopted by the Slovak government, is to strengthen conditions for the CRPD's implementation in line with the principle "Leave no one behind." Slovakia is committed to continue in its efforts to ensure that living conditions of persons with disabilities are improved, a high-quality care without any discrimination is provided to them, and their inherent dignity, as recognized by the CRPD, is fully respected. Moreover, the government of Slovakia adopted the resolution of 28 June 2022 to create the Government Council for Persons with Disabilities as its advisory body to cope with challenges persons with disabilities are facing, including in the area of barriers removal, to foster their inclusion and improve their well-being in all spheres of the society. In order to reach this goal, the Slovak government works closely with civil society and other stakeholders advocating interests of persons with disabilities who are also represented in the council concerned. Mr. Chair, Slovakia seizes this opportunity to deplore once again unjustified and unprovoked Russian aggression against Ukraine as a blatant violation of international law and principles of the UN Charter. The situation of persons with disabilities is particularly appalling, as in some cases they are unable to leave their home, cannot reach shelters, and access to basic services and assistance is limited. Slovakia reiterates its call for an immediate cessation of Russian military activities in Ukraine and unconditional withdrawal of all Russian troops from the whole territory of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Slovakia, and now I would like to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Mexico to make a statement.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. Chairman, Mexico has been an active proponent of initiatives aimed at promoting and protecting the human rights of persons with disabilities. More than 20 years ago, my country took on active leadership in the multilateral sphere, which culminated with the adoption on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This instrument has become a global reference, and it's the outcome of the joint efforts of member states, civil society, and organizations of the disabled. Furthermore, it has been a pillar in the fight for the recognition and respect for the rights of persons with disabilities. While we hail the notable progress achieved thanks to the convention, such as laying the groundwork for a more effective focus on the human rights in the area of psychosocial support and mental health. We also acknowledge that there are still significant challenges, and bearing that in mind, the Conference of State Parties is a fundamental opportunity to strengthen multilateralism by exchanging experience, good practices, and shared challenges. Mr. Chairman, in comparison with other population groups, persons with disabilities confront greater risks in the educational sphere, access to health care, social inclusion, and financial adversity. Furthermore, they're more likely to be victims of crime and possible abuses of human rights. Plus, they could confront multiple intersectional forms of discrimination. These challenges are not inherent to disabilities. They are the product of systemic obstacles and policies that limit their full participation in society. In Mexico, more than 6 million people live with some form of disability, and to address these needs, my country has put into place programs such as a well-being pension for persons with disabilities, Sport for All, which seeks to in particular focus on the rights of indigenous peoples, teens, and other groups. In the electoral sphere, the National Electoral Institute developed a protocol to ensure the right of vote and the right of participation citizens for persons with disability. To maintain this momentum, Mexico would like to appeal to all member states to continue promoting the universal ratification of the convention. Mr. Chairman, to conclude, Mexico reaffirms its commitment to make progress towards the inclusion of persons with disability in the work of the UN, and as chairs of the group of friends of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and co-facilitators of the resolution on the implementation of the Convention and promoting the universal ratification of this Convention. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Mexico, and I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Inclusion Canada.
Distinguished delegates, I am Robin Acton, President of Inclusion Canada, a federation tirelessly working for the human rights and full inclusion of people with an intellectual disability. I am here not as a person with a disability, but as a mother of a woman with an intellectual disability and the spouse of a person with a significant physical disability. Our family is immersed in living with a disability. Throughout all of our experiences, my voice, alongside that of my husband's and my daughter's, has been essential in ensuring my daughter's life is not defined by her disability. Rather, it is defined, like mine and yours, by her uniqueness, her passions, her relationships, and her aspirations. It's the voice of individuals, their families, and allies that has propelled Inclusion Canada to the forefront of the movement for inclusion. This journey towards inclusion is not one we walk alone. It's a path we traverse together as a global community, adhering to the principle of nothing without us. Today, we gather at the 16th session of the Conference of States Parties to the CRPD. Our goal, to harmonize national policies with the CRPD. Why? Because for too long, persons with intellectual disabilities have been waiting to access inclusive education, waiting for decent support so they don't have to live in poverty, waiting to have their decisions supported and respected, waiting for the CRPD to be realized, waiting to be included. Inclusion means ensuring equal access to opportunities like education. Erin had an inclusive education from kindergarten to college. It laid the foundation for her inclusive life. Inclusive education should not be a privilege. It must be the norm. We are fighting to make this a reality in Canada. Inclusion means respecting the legal capacity of individuals with intellectual disabilities to be fully included in all decision-making processes affecting them. Our fight continues to see Canada remove its reservation on Article 12 of the CRPD. Inclusion means valuing all lives. It means seeing life with a disability as a life worth living and acting with great urgency when a person with a disability is suffering to the point that they would rather die. Inclusion means safeguarding lives. As we face the expansion of euthanasia on the basis of disability in our country, our commitment to the CRPD compels us to advocate for the highest attainable health care for all and for the provision of adequate supports. Canada has blatantly disregarded the true needs of people with intellectual disabilities, and it's time for this to change. Today, we call on all of you to champion inclusion, as we know it can be a matter of life and death. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Inclusion Canada, and now I would like to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Austria to make a statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria aligns itself with the statements of the EU, the group of friends of persons with disabilities, and a group of countries delivered by Iceland. Ever since ratifying the CRPD, implementation of provisions has always been a key priority for Austria. Our first national action plan for persons with disability ran from 2012 to 2021, and last July, a follow-up plan for the period 2022 to 2030 was adopted. These action plans contain Austria's comprehensive long-term disability policy strategies. In this regard, we therefore also very much welcome the overarching theme of this year's conference to discuss the importance of exactly such national strategies. For our part, special efforts were undertaken to harmonize the action plan with the CRPD in an inclusive manner. Civil society participated during the drafting process, in particular by involving DPOs from the very beginning until the completion of the editorial work. Austria's National Action Plan contains 8 chapters, 55 subchapters covering all areas of life and policy. 288 objectives and almost 150 indicators have been defined. The plan contains 375 concrete measures that should be implemented by 2030 based on the principle of disability mainstreaming. The plan and progress on its implementation will be scientifically evaluated on an ongoing basis. This implementation of the plan has already started, and maybe I'll give just one example regarding the pilot project on personal assistance. Austria is in the process of implementing a nationwide general framework regarding the rules and procedures for providing personal assistance to people with disabilities in all areas of life. Even though personal assistance outside of the workplace is regulated by regional entities, by the Länder, according to our constitution, Austria's goal is to harmonize the different existing systems through financial incentives for those regions that apply the nationally proposed rules. The harmonization efforts include the areas of definition of personal assistance, criteria and procedures for assessing the need for personal assistance, service features, performance of personal assistance, as well as evaluation and quality control. And the Austrian government is providing up to 100 million euros to implement this nationwide general framework. Mr. President, we can't forget, of course, the dire situation in Ukraine and other places of conflict. Persons with disabilities are particularly affected by conflict, by armed conflict and strife. We have to care particularly for those, and many people also had to leave the country. We need to support these people in the best possible way and enable their participation and inclusion in our societies from the very beginning. Austria is going to do its best to do that as it continues to work ambitiously on the implementation of the CRPD in general. This August, we will report on the progress made to the CRPD Committee in Geneva during the second state review. Also, key focus will be on the National Action Plan on Disability as a crucial instrument for our further work, supported by all our federal ministries, all our regional entities. We look forward to sharing and discussing the achievements as well as the challenges of harmonizing national policies and strategies with our partners, the CRPD states, parties, and civil society. Thank you.
I would like to thank His Excellency, the distinguished representative of Austria. And with this, I would like now to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. The adoption of the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities marked a turning point in the long battle to improve their living conditions. However, the challenges we face to eradicate all forms of discrimination against these persons, especially when it comes to mobility, training, employment, access to health care and leisure, they remain daunting. And therefore, the CRPD rightly asks member states to take all appropriate measures, including measures that are legislative in nature, to modify, to abolish or amend all laws, regulations, customs, and practices that may be sources of discrimination against those with disabilities. To this end, Côte d'Ivoire, which ratified this convention in 2014, has adopted a number of legislative institutional measures in order to make significant progress. And it has taken a number of measures for people with disabilities. These include a program for employment assistance for persons living with disabilities in the private sector, as well as a policy for employment promotion for persons living with disabilities. We also have a compendium of skills of those with disabilities, and we also are promoting exceptional recruitment of persons with albinism in the public sector in 2015 and 2018. Mr. President, in conclusion, Côte d'Ivoire is calling on all member states to effectively implement the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in order to eliminate the many obstacles to the promotion of their rights, which have been caused by inequality and cultural discrimination. Thank you.
I'd like to warmly thank the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire. And right now, I would like to recognize and kindly invite the distinguished representative of Peru.
Muy buenas tardes, les saluda.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandro Piro Marcos, President of the National Council for the Integration of Persons with Disability of Peru. This is an executive body specialized in the area of disabilities that is part of the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations. On behalf of the institution that I lead, I'm grateful to this conference for the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment as a state in the framework of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities of the United Nations. Our commitment to become an inclusive country with equal opportunities. For this purpose, we are designing actions aimed at eliminating barriers of the physical communication environment and attitudes that limit the development of persons with disability. These people today represent 10.3% of the entire population of Peru. Peru acknowledges all the recommendations and observations that have been made by the Committee on Persons with Disability of the United Nations in March of this year. And we in CONADIS have undertaken actions to coordinate at all levels of government to ensure follow-up to the aforementioned observations and comments, because we consider that the aforementioned convention gives us a mandate and sets out a path of interventions that lead us to guarantee the rights of persons with disabilities. As a country, we'd like to highlight substantive progress. For example, the full right for the legal capacity that today persons with disability can enjoy in Peru. Another important advance in this area took place in June of 2021 with the adoption of the national policy, multi-sectoral policy on disabilities for development to 2030, which sets out coordinated actions to eliminate structural discrimination that persons with disability confront, ensuring their full exercise of their rights and creating conditions for their comprehensive development. Lastly, we wish you every success for this conference. This is a very valuable opportunity to promote a debate on the achievements and challenges to harmonize state policies with this important instrument. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Peru. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we need now to take a close of the general debate, which will restart this afternoon at 3 p.m. The conference shall continue considering the same agenda item 5A in order to hear the remainder of the speakers of the general debate, starting with Honduras, who shall be the first to speak in the afternoon. An updated list of speakers will be posted in this room before the start of the afternoon meeting. I would kindly remind and appreciate your full support and cooperation by arriving at the venue and taking your seats well in advance by 2:55 this afternoon, so that we all together can assure that this conference will be able to start on time and proceeds as scheduled. We will now have a 10 minutes break, and I may kindly invite all our panelists to please proceed to take your seats at the podium. Thank you for your cooperation. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I call to open the meeting Roundtable 1, and I have the pleasure of co-chairing this roundtable along with my civil society colleague, Savaira Tinaivunivalu, who is the Office Manager, Fiji Disabled Peoples Federation, working at the Federation and has held progressively responsible positions, including as Associate Investigator working on the Disability Inclusive Education Program. Savaira has been part of the team promoting educational awareness and outreach in the community, and she is engaging with partner agencies at the national level, such as the Ministry of Health, to ensure the safety and protection of women and young girls with disabilities. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the current global normative framework, consisting of international human rights treaties and development instruments, provides us already comprehensive guidance on issues concerning the advancement of the rights of persons with disabilities in the context of sexual and reproductive health services and rights for persons with disabilities. Today, Savaira and I, we will facilitate this roundtable discussion on the important issue concerning ensuring equal access to and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities. It is the very first time that this issue will be discussed in the conference. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, a core human rights treaty and legally binding instrument, provides us with a strong norm for all of our 186 state parties. According to Article 25 of the Convention, state parties are required to take all appropriate measures to ensure access for persons with disabilities to health services, including in the area of sexual and reproductive health and population-based public health programs. Also, Article 23 requires states to eliminate discrimination against persons with disabilities in all matters relating to marriage, family, parenthood, and relationships, including in the areas of fertility and family life, as well as to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities have access to age-appropriate information, reproductive and family planning education, and the means necessary to enable them to exercise these rights. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, although enormous evidence confirms that persons with disabilities, just like everyone else, are sexually active and have the same needs for and the right to access sexual and reproductive health services, persons with disabilities are regularly excluded from the provision of such services due to environmental and attitudinal barriers, such as the lack of physical accessibility in healthcare facilities and public transport, and the low level of awareness and misperceptions of the sexual and reproductive health needs of the persons with disabilities. This false but widespread, unfortunately, assumption that persons with disabilities are not sexually active results in the lack of sufficient attention and limited resources that have been devoted to ensuring that persons with disabilities have equal access. Clearly, there are huge gaps between the high level of political commitment and practices on the ground. These gaps are manifested in the lived experience of many persons with disabilities in assessing and accessing the relevant health services that they require to fully enjoy their rights. Furthermore, increasing experiences from many countries told us all these existing gaps can be overcome. And when will be that? When states parties take appropriate actions and interventions in line with the Convention. For instance, by putting health equity, non-discrimination and equal rights for persons with disabilities at the center and at the epicenter of their sexual and reproductive health actions, engaging and empowering persons with disabilities to participate meaningfully in sexual and reproductive health actions, including in its design and implementation, as well as by monitoring and evaluating the extent to which sexual and reproductive health actions are leading to health equity for persons with disabilities. Dear colleagues, dear friends, this year marks an important midpoint for reviewing the progress made in implementing the 2030 Agenda. As member states, United Nations entities, and other stakeholders, we continue to build back better from the COVID-19 crisis. Our efforts need to be accelerated, though, towards implementation of the 2030 Agenda for All and the Convention. Against all the above-mentioned backdrop, the Conference of States Parties, for the very first time in its history, convened this special roundtable focusing on the important topic regarding sexual and reproductive health services and rights for persons with disabilities. The roundtable will provide us a unique opportunity to review and reflect the current situation, progress and challenges, as well as opportunities in ensuring equal access to and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services. And we can also share good practices and explore strategies to advance the rights of persons with disability in this area. And now it's my great honor to recognize and extend a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists for this roundtable. I will begin with Mr. Anderson Henao Orozco, President of the National Council on Disability and also Manager of Inclusion of People with Disabilities Management of the Vice Presidency of Colombia. Mrs. Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes, the Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General, His Excellency, on Disability and Accessibility. Mrs. Leila Sharafi, a Global Disability Focal Point and Senior Advisor at UNFPA. Mrs. Nora Gross, Professor and Director of Disability Center at the University College of London. And Mr. Saddam Hanjabam, representing YAOL, a youth network in India. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in order to have a focused and interactive discussion, we would like to call our panelists to make a presentation for 7 minutes, after which we will invite the delegations and the observers to join our interactive discussion to either pose specific questions to panelists. When you're given the floor, please unmute your microphone, identify your name and the name of your country or organization before posing your questions. Please note that all interventions shall be limited to no longer than 2 minutes, so that we make sure the discussion is interactive and, most importantly, to allow for a wider participation. Now let me turn to our distinguished panelists, and without further ado, I would like to now hand over to Mrs. Savaira Tinaivunivalu, Civil Society Co-Chair, to moderate this panel discussion. Over to you, Savaira.
Thank you, Mr. Kezas. Dear colleagues, it is my great honor to introduce and invite our first panelist, Mr. Anderson Henao Orozco. Mr. Orozco is the President of the National Council on Disability and also the Manager of Inclusion of People with Disability Management of the Vice Presidency, Government of Colombia. Mr. Orozco, who is blind, is a social worker and researcher in the field of critical disability studies. He holds a Master in Contemporary Social Studies and is currently working on his second master degree in philosophy at the Universidad del Rosario. He is a humanitarian worker and a human rights activist. Mr. Orozco, the floor is yours. Please remember to keep your presentation to 7 minutes in order to allow the maximum of exchange with the distinguished delegates.
Buenos días. Espero que esté encendido el micrófono.
Good morning. I hope the microphone is working. I would like to convey my greetings to you, to all of you, as well as the other panelists. It's a great honor for me to be here with you today. We are speaking today about progress when it comes to public programs for persons with disabilities. The issue of sexuality, the link between disability and sexuality, is almost a taboo subject. And it seems to be relegated to the private sphere. However, in Colombia, and like other countries of the region and the entire world, this is one of the modern-day problems that we are facing. It's linked to autonomy, to independence, and to living in communities. It also is linked to the exercise of human rights, especially the right to pleasure. Colombia was the 100th country to ratify the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2011. It was ratified by the Constitutional Court. And over the years since then, there has been a great deal of progress when it comes to regulations and laws. The state of Colombia has established various laws and regulations allowing persons with disabilities to exercise and enjoy their rights. There have been three major areas of regulatory progress that I'd like to highlight. First of all, Decree 1421 of 2017. This decree concerns the right to education for boys and girls with disabilities. This was an inclusive education decree. There also Resolution 1904 of 2017, which stems from a ruling of the Constitutional Court from 2016 concerning an attempted forced sterilization of a teenage girl with an intellectual disability. And the third instrument is Law 1996 of 2019 on legal capacity of persons with disabilities, and that is directly linked to the convention. It also concerns the right to information and to informed consent, as well as the recognition of the legal capacity of persons with disabilities. These instruments today allow us to present the progress that has been made, but also the challenges that remain when it comes to the sexual and reproductive health of persons with disabilities. Understanding the importance of sexual and reproductive rights of persons with disabilities means understanding their links with other rights. The rights I've already mentioned, the rights to education of boys and girls with disabilities, recognition of their legal capacity to make decisions in everyday life. And with regard to sexual practices, sexual orientation, diversity of sexual orientation, family planning, and so on. And of course, there also is the right to accessibility, or at least accessibility as a prerequisite for the exercise of other rights. And it's important for information and educational programs on sexual rights meet this criterion of accessibility for persons with disabilities. And this is where the challenge lies for Colombia. We need to promote awareness-raising campaigns for public servants, civil servants, and for professionals working in the healthcare sector, for example. This also concerns families and the family environment, which belongs to the private sphere and which affects the exercise and enjoyment of these rights of persons with disabilities. So what are we doing in Colombia to ensure these rights are protected beyond the need to promote resolution of 2017, that is 1904? We are currently ratifying the optional protocol to the convention, and in addition, we also need to expand guarantees of rights of persons with disabilities. We're working with the UNFPA to engage in consultations with the public, and we've asked if the public were aware of this resolution, that is 1904, and the population, it turns out, is not very aware of that resolution, and those who are aware of it don't know how to use it. So that means that we are not doing enough when it comes to outreach to the public on sexual and reproductive rights. To conclude, the person who was supposed to be with me today, Natalia Moreno Rodriguez, had prepared a presentation, but for several reasons, she was not able to come. But I'd like to end with something she likes to say. She says, "My body is beautiful, erotic, attractive, and desirable. My body is as real as those of others." Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Orozco, for his excellent presentation. Our next speaker will be Ms. Maria Soledad Sistan Reyes from Chile, but she will be speaking in her current capacity as the Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General on Disability and Accessibility. Ms. Reyes was appointed as the UN Secretary General Special Envoy on Disability and Accessibility since June 2017. Ms. Reyes has been promoting the rights of persons with disability at regional and global level. Prior to the current appointment, she was the chairperson of the Committee of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the recipient of the National Prize of Human Rights from 2014 to 2015. She has been working closely with the United Nations on disability issues for the past 2 decades, including serving as an expert before the ad hoc committee that drafted the CRPD. As a human rights lawyer by training, she also served as a professor in various universities. Ms. Reyes, the floor is yours, and you have 7 minutes.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning to everyone. The purpose of my presentation today is to acquaint you with the model protocol on maternity of women with disability. It's a maternity as any other because women with disabilities can conceive children, become mothers, bring them up just like all other women. And so I prefer to speak of maternity with support rather than assisted maternity, to leave behind medically assisted models. The protocol came up precisely because of an urgent need of many women with disabilities as soon as they find out that they're pregnant and everything that comes afterwards. And this is why we collected testimonies of many types of women with different types of disabilities so that they could share with us their experiences and how this can be translated into a positive instrument, an instrument that serves countries, that is useful and that can be implemented at the national level in the health, within the health services and other services. This protocol has certain background documents, which sums up in a few words the barriers that exist. And as soon as a woman who finds out that she's a mother confronts these barriers with fear of what will come in many of the aspects during her pregnancy, giving birth, post the subsequent period. And what we need to bear in mind is, and what many women with disabilities told us, is the experience of being ignored by persons who were supposed to care for them, of being infantilized. And in some cases, they even felt humiliated due to the treatment they received as pregnant women. I don't usually tell you about personal experiences, but in this case, I think it's worth it. One time I went to see a doctor for a surgery, and when I began asking the doctor on the alternatives to this surgery, the doctor told me, well, next time please come with your husband. And I got up and I was outraged, and I said, the operation is on my body, I'm going to pay with my money, and then I left. That just tells you that in many cases they're very humiliating situations for women with disabilities. And this is especially the case of women seeking gynecological care or maternity care. And I want to say that many women with disabilities have their husband or partners, but it is them, the women, who confront the situations with various types of caregivers that treat them. So even though they might have their partners with them, we're specifically focusing on this protocol are the situations where women are face to face with the various caregivers. But often these women are alone; they don't have their partners with them, or they don't have partners, nor do they have even family networks, and so they need to be cared for with the dignity that they deserve. And this implies first and foremost eliminating any kind of mistreatment, violence, obstetrical violence, but also very inordinary treatment when an individual comes into a hospital, which is the first kind of environment which a pregnant woman confronts. And so the legal basis for this protocol can be seen very easily in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 6, for example, which speaks of multiple forms of discrimination of women with disabilities, and that states must take all necessary measures to the development and empowerment and of women with disabilities. Also, the article that prescribes psychological integrity of individuals with disability with regard to their families and home and the need to be independent, the right to health, to rehabilitation, also the right to work. And so most of you know this convention very well. I won't get into it, but I think you all know what the legal foundation is based off. And so, based on that, the protocol that I am speaking of seeks to achieve an awareness raising of the particular situation of pregnant women with a disability, and it is destined to medical teams and the way they need to treat women, particularly during childbirth, ensuring that their partner is there to facilitate the childbirth, and also during the childbirth to decide whether it's better to have childbirth by cesarean or a natural childbirth, and for the woman to decide whether she wants to give birth in water or another, or crouching, and then in the post-birth period, where in addition to caring for the woman, you need to teach the woman the way to care for her baby, and there are also all kinds of tips in this protocol for the personnel caring for women, whether we're talking about a woman with a physical disability, whether she is blind or deaf or has intellectual disability, psychosocial disability. I won't get into this because you can look, you can see the protocol and see all the different tips that are there. And then just to conclude, because my time is almost up, I want to say that This not only is intended for healthcare teams who need to become aware of the gender approach, such issues as intersectionality, accessibility, reasonable adjustments, support for decision making. All of this must also must include psychological support and assistance in reincorporating the woman into her job, support for raising her kids, support for education, to be able to care for her kids, and also to the various administrative procedures that she needs to go through, including visiting rights and all kinds of other legal issues. And to conclude, I want to just say that, of course, the protocol implies certain legal changes, and I would suggest that you use this material in your states and that you forward it to various services, such as ministries for women's rights and others, because they will play a very important role in coordinating provision of various services and the implementation of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Riaz, for your contribution. Now it is my honor to present our next panelist, Ms. Leila Sarafi, who is the UN Population Fund, or UNFPA. Leila currently is the Global Senior Gender Equality Advisor and the Global Disability Focal Point within the Gender and Human Rights branch of the Technical Division at the UNFPA. Leila's role at UNFPA is to coordinate the organization's gender mainstreaming efforts and manage global gender and human rights programs, including those related to women and girls facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Leila, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here today with all of you and also with such esteemed panelists. On behalf of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, we would like to express our sincere appreciation for this historical roundtable discussion. It shines a critical spotlight on sexual and reproductive health and rights. UNFPA is committed to disability inclusion throughout its work to promote equitable access to sexual and reproductive health services. The 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, the ICPD, was a landmark shift in its acknowledgement of the importance of sexual and reproductive health and rights of persons with disabilities. Article 25 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognizes that persons with disabilities have the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. This has strengthened disability movements, enabled transnational alliances, and resulted in revision of discriminatory legislation. This progress in achieving access to sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities must be celebrated. Despite this progress, we know that major challenges remain with regards to equal access to sexual and reproductive health services. Many women and girls with disabilities face numerous barriers to accessing sexual and reproductive health care. Demographic health surveys from 5 low and middle income countries indicate that 29% of births by mothers with disabilities are not attended by a skilled health worker, and 22% of married women with disabilities have an unmet need for family planning. These figures are likely to be an underestimation of the true gaps in service access for women with disabilities. A recent study also demonstrated that women with disabilities reported experiencing sexual violence double the proportion of that experienced by women without disabilities. This highlights a greater need for a coordinated set of accessible, essential, and quality multi-sectoral services for persons with disabilities and prevention of violence measures. According to UNFPA's 2023 State of the World Population Report, persons with disabilities continue to be subjected to population control policies that strip away their fundamental rights. Forced sterilizations, non-consensual contraception still exist under legal sanction worldwide. These egregious forms of reproductive coercion and violations affect the bodily autonomy and rights of persons with disabilities, especially women and girls with disabilities. Bodily autonomy is essential for the realization of gender equality and of human rights, and is a cornerstone for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet, according to data tracking on SDG Target 5.6, we know that just over half of women around the world make their own decisions about sexual and reproductive health and rights. Women with disabilities face even more restrictions on their bodily autonomy. For our part, as the UN agency mandated to promote sexual and reproductive health and rights, we are making some efforts. Through our global midwifery program, UNFPA is working with partners to steadily add the use of sign language to address sexual, reproductive, maternal, newborn, and adolescent health counseling and respectful maternal health care of women and adolescent girls with hearing and speech impairments. In Kenya and Zambia, the use of sign language is now fully mainstream in the pre-service curriculum of midwives who provide life-saving care. Policy is being translated into practice in some places, including Timor-Leste. Training on disability inclusion and considerations have been integrated into the in-service training package of healthcare providers and managers. By engaging organizations of persons with disabilities to conduct those trainings, healthcare providers are also able to engage very closely with gender-based violence survivors with disabilities. This better ensures that services are rights-based and survivor-centered. UNFPA's We Decide program, a global flagship initiative on disability inclusion, supported by Spain, has strengthened disability-inclusive prevention and response to gender-based violence and to sexual and reproductive health and rights at the global, regional, and country levels. Guidelines we developed as UNFPA with Women Enabled International have been influencing policy and practice in over 70 countries and have been instrumental for ensuring disability-inclusive and gender-transformative sexual and reproductive health services. Access to information and education is also key to bodily autonomy. UNFPA's East and Southern Africa Regional Office and partners have developed an evidence-informed approach to providing comprehensive sexuality education for young people with disabilities. This is entitled Breaking the Silence. Educators and trainers working in the formal education sector and in communities were trained on the approach in 12 countries across the region. Young people both in and out of schools have benefited from the Breaking the Silence approach and can access this critical life skills information and education. Through the Rapariga Biz program in Mozambique, participants like 17-year-old Zanura Fabula, who used to hide her disability, worked with a mentor who was trained on disability-inclusive sexual and reproductive health. This helped Zanura have access to critical health information and establish social connections. A comprehensive accessibility review of health centers in Mozambique also resulted in an action plan to enhance accessibility, including structural modifications, use of equipment with universal design features, and communication of information in accessible formats. In Ecuador, UNFPA has worked hand in hand with organizations of persons with disabilities and the Ministry of Health to support the development of a comprehensive handbook on sexual and reproductive health care for persons with disabilities. Addressing gender-based violence is part of a comprehensive sexual and reproductive health package. Throughout various regions, including in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and the Asian Pacific region, as well as in Morocco, UNFPA has been working with partners to strengthen availability of disability-inclusive, gender-based violence services and information. The collection and analysis and use of population data is key to informing policies and service provision. Although the proportion of censuses globally that include questions on disability are on the rise, there remains a need to unify the methods used to ensure quality of that data. We've been advocating for and providing support to governments undertaking their censuses to use the Washington Group questions. And in the Asia-Pacific region, we've developed a disability data advocacy workshop for organizations of persons with disabilities. This year, we're also honored to be chairing the United Nations Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNPRPD, a unique partnership that brings together UN entities, governments, and organizations of persons with disabilities and civil society to advance the rights of persons with disabilities. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, when sexual and reproductive health needs are not met, individuals are deprived of the right to make crucial choices about their own bodies and futures, with a cascading impact on their families' welfare and future generations. As we gather this week, we acknowledge the advocates and human rights defenders around the world who are working tirelessly each day to make human rights a reality for all and making services accessible, spaces inclusive, and free of discrimination and stigma. We urge all stakeholders to play their part in this, especially the duty bearers. And as UNFPA, we stand ready to support you in your collective strive to ensure available, acceptable, accessible, and quality sexual and reproductive health services for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rafi, for your excellent presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great honor to invite our next panelist, Ms. Nora Grosset. Professor Grosset is a director of the UCL International Disability Research Center at University College London. She works in global health and international development. Much of her work has concentrated on people with disabilities. She previously served on the faculties of Harvard University from 1984 to 1990 and Yale 1990 to 2008, where she helped establish and run the Global Health Program before being appointed to the Cheshire Chair at UCL in 2008. Nora Grosset has published widely and also serves on a number of national and international committees and advisory boards. Professor Grosset, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We've been asked to address an overarching question on this panel, which is what are the major obstacles to persons with disabilities enjoying equal access to sexual and reproductive health services? As the academic on this panel, I suspect I'm expected to say more research. And of course, we can always use more information. But there's a lot of information already out there. We need to use it. In fact, in reviewing the very good note from the Secretariat that was developed for this panel, I'm struck by the fact that every issue raised, from government buy-in to collaborations with organizations of disabled people to inclusion of people with disabilities in HIV efforts, have already been discussed for many years. Of course, if these things were easy to fix, we would have already fixed them. But we already have enough information to begin to move from research to much more aggressive implementation. The questions we've been asked to address here fall into three main groups: how to get governments and policymakers to implement access to sexual and reproductive health care for persons with disabilities, how to implement programming to reach those most marginalized, and how to get innovative approaches and new technologies into play. I'm going to add one more: where are the gaps? And let me address each of these very quickly in turn with a few thoughts. Let's start with the first: how to get governments and policymakers to improve access. From the CRPD to national laws to local laws, a number of legal provisions are already in place, but laws on the books must be translated into action. And here's where governments could do much more. Let me provide a few suggestions. One is enforcement. We need better oversight and enforcement of laws at community and local levels. Governments can, but usually don't, tie funding, licensing, and accreditation of facilities and health professionals to their ability to provide quality services for disabled populations. Nor do governments usually provide enough funds, often any funds, for administrators and inspectors to assess whether health programs are actually available and accessible. I know in the countries I've worked with, I know of no official who has ever wound up in jail, and few organizations that have ever been heavily fined for breaching mandated disability rights. Also, accountability. Calls for monitoring and evaluation are usually added at the end of long discussions. I think they should be at the beginning of most discussions. We already have new tools, for example, the Washington Group questions, that allow much easier monitoring and evaluation to take place, but we need to use them. Also, the issue of accreditation. In all countries, doctors, nurses, psychologists, as well as teachers, architects, and many more professionals linked to the design, running, and maintenance of health services must be trained by accredited programs and pass a state examination to be licensed to practice. We should push to ensure questions about disability, both legal rights and specific health concerns, are in all examinations and reviews, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also to ensure that professionals are taught and will prioritize learning these materials in order to pass these exams. We must also push for ensuring that people with disabilities are trained and are able to practice in these professions as well. The second question is how to reach those most marginalized. There's no one simple, one-size-fits-all approach, and I can't go into all the variables here, but a few approaches can help. One is the twin track approach that comes in and out of popularity, but inclusion of people with disabilities in mainstream efforts and specifically targeted efforts for harder to reach groups such as young people with intellectual disabilities has proven consistently to be a viable approach, and we need to keep this in mind. We also need more consistent inclusion for people with disabilities in all sorts of community projects and programs that include sexual and reproductive health information or services, not just disability-focused ones. For example, some years ago, my colleagues and I found that twice as many of the women with disabilities we were working in one region in Nepal were participating in women's groups than in the local organizations for disabled people, and the women's groups were providing sexual and reproductive health services. The third question is how to get innovative approaches and new technologies such as mobile health apps and telemedicines into play. This is being discussed throughout many sessions here this week, so I won't go into detail, but a few thoughts. One is that new approaches abound. For example, the UK NGO Marie Stopes over the past few years undertook a pilot program in Sierra Leone to train all their sexual and reproductive health counselors, not just a subgroup of disability specialists, on information on sexual and reproductive health care for people with disabilities. An international or UN-based central clearinghouse for such information is needed. We have some, and UNFPA has really led the way in much of this, but we need to collect many more grassroots examples and make them easily available in a centralized databases or other places that are easily reached. New technologies, particularly those that allow for wide dissemination of information, are all being made easier. Everybody's quoting mobile health apps and telemedicine and social media resources. I won't go into this in depth here, but let me raise a few areas of concern. One is that low literacy rates, especially among adults with disabilities, means not just difficulty in accessing some of these new technologies, but raises the issue of health literacy, understanding the information given, and we need to address this and take it into consideration. Poverty, we talk about the affordability of computers and cell phones that will block access to many people with disabilities. But in some cases, people with disabilities cannot afford electricity, let alone these devices. We also need to take that into consideration. And finally, cell phones, computers, and so forth are often shared in families, and people with disabilities may not have equal access. Moreover, they may also have their access closely regulated, so their ability to look at information about sexual and reproductive health may be limited. And where are the gaps? Well, a few ideas come to mind. Actually, more than a few, but let me just say a few that come immediately to mind here. Women and girls' access to sexual and reproductive health is critically important, but men and boys with disabilities too often are also overlooked and continue to pick up information on sexual and reproductive health haphazardly. Lacking knowledge, they are at grave risk for exploitation, exposure to infectious diseases, including HIV/AIDS, and being involved in unwanted pregnancies. In educational systems that are increasingly inclusive, we still do little to instruct general classroom teachers on how to identify abuse in children with disabilities or how to work with girls who begin menstruating, even though we know that such information is often withheld or less available to these children in their homes. And finally, access to sexual and reproductive health of people with disabilities is the responsibility of every organization that deals with sexual and reproductive health. Too often we push the full burden of this information onto NGOs and OPDs. While many do amazing jobs, it is also the core responsibilities that governments must undertake the dissemination of this material to all citizens, review and mapping of all organizations in a community that provide sexual and reproductive health services to ensure they also have a disability component is a good place to start. People with disabilities deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grosse, for your excellent presentation. Dear delegates, civil society friends, I thank panelists for their contribution, and now I hand over the co-chairmanship back to Mr. Tasos, Vice President of the conference, who will continue moderate our meeting today. Thank you, Mr. Tasos.
Thank you, Savaira. Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Now I would like to invite our last panelist, Mr. Saddam Hajabam, who is representing the NGO YAL, the youth network that is based in Manipur, India. Saddam, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, panelists, and every representatives of NGOs and different countries. My name is Saddam Hanjawam, and I'm a member of Transforming Communities of Inclusion, and I lead an organization called YAL, which is based in Manipur, which is Northeast India's first LGBTIQ+I youth-led and focused organization working towards achieving Sustainable Development Goals since 2017. My state, Manipur, is in a conflict zone. As I speak today, more than 100 people have died and 50,000 people displaced in the last 45 days. There has been a total internet shutdown since 3rd May by the government, and we are living in isolation from the world where more and more countries and organizations talk about health technologies, digitization, and online innovations to achieve sustainable development goals. So on the outset, I would like to draw all of your attention to Article 11 of the CRPD, focusing on situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies, and intervene on peace building and safety of the rights of persons with disabilities in our state. June is Pride Month. Let me share my own story with you as we speak on the intersections of sexual health and disability. I grew up closeted in my state, fearing the conflict and the military my whole childhood. In 2007, I migrated to a different state for higher education and lived in 3 different states till 2017. It gave me the freedom to explore my own sexuality in a safer zone. But one thing that kept bothering me was the effect of living with intergenerational trauma and as a gay migrant for 10 years. It affected my mental health, and I slipped into severe depression during my college days and started depending on drugs. But in 2017, I overdosed on meth, a popular drug among gay men, and was taken to a hospital. Unfortunately, instead of providing care and support, I was ridiculed, and they refused to admit me in the hospital without registering a criminal case against me. Only after the police arrived, my treatment was started. I was sedated, chained, and put in an isolation ward. The trauma of that day still lies with me. I feel guilty of coming out as gay. I feel guilty of opening up about my mental health. I feel guilty of seeking help from a hospital. Unfortunately, I relapsed within 3 months. I was only provided with more medicines for treatment, but no healthcare providers wanted to talk about the intersections of sexuality and mental health, even though I opened up to them. As a young gay man who survived 2 drug overdoses and lives with post-traumatic stress disorder, the torture, the isolation, and the shame while availing services related to sexual, reproductive, and mental health were inhuman and was neither affirmative nor inclusive. So for the majority of young people like me, who live in the margins and belong to communities which had been historically marginalized, the question of equity and equal access in healthcare settings is just a faraway dream. The most unfortunate issues that we face even today are the beliefs and lack of interventions on the intersections of sexuality and disability rights, where policymakers and people without disabilities fail to acknowledge our choices, desires, consent, freedom and autonomy to our bodies, right to independence or companionship or parenthood. The neglect in understanding our rights and abilities cancels equal access to sexual and reproductive policies and services, but more importantly, limit our access to legal rights to our body, mind, and society. The stigma based on one's gender identity, sexual orientation, sex characteristics, health conditions, class, caste, reason, and religion largely affects the access to health services which are mostly centralized, medicalized, and heteronormative. Unfortunately, institutionalization, criminalization, and isolation further leads towards discrimination. This first-hand experiences of social exclusion and trauma further question the guiding principles of CRPD. The idea of institutionalization as the sole mechanism of rehabilitation is a challenge to the United Nations mechanisms itself. It must be reiterated that institutionalization is not just a form of discrimination violating the CRPD, but a form of violence that dehumanizes the community in the name of recovery. This cycle of violence, discrimination, and social exclusion robs our dignity as a person and further exploits the rights to live in the society. I request the government and state parties to take appropriate action against institutional torture and instead focus on integrating services for sexual and reproductive facilities and psychosocial support in community settings. They should also take in consideration the discrimination due to our intersectional identities such as LGBTIQ+, people living with HIV, racial identities, and ethnicities. The worst experience during emergencies that we are facing now are the abuses, mishandling, and sexual assaults towards children, women, queer, and transgender persons. Additionally, we have learned through our experiences, and the challenges could be solved by engaging more young people meaningfully, by creating more diverse options for recovery, redesigning accessible structures and spaces for inclusion in healthcare settings, decentralization and localization of services, and building capacities and awareness around sexual reproductive health and rights and its intersection with disability. We at YAOL have widely used sports and football to talk about inclusion and comprehensive sexuality education and well-being, even leading to the creation of Asia's first all-transgender football team and a shelter space for LGBTIQ individuals facing homelessness through crowdfunding. So to conclude my speech, we have talked a lot about nothing about us without us and left no one behind since the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals. Unfortunately, we have been left way behind without proper resources and support from our own people and community. So my question to all of you is, how will you ensure equity and social justice for young persons and communities like us in the margins in the next half to the target of Sustainable Development Goals 2030? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saddam, and all panelists for your presentations. I now recognize and I would like to invite Mrs. Odilia Fitoussi, member of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, who is sitting at the delegation of Israel, to speak as a discussant. Mrs. Fitoussi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. At the beginning of my remarks, I would like to thank everyone who presented on the panel that have shared with us a vital information. In the convention, all the articles are like bricks, one on the top of the other one. The existence of every right depends on the existence of other rights, and this presents the challenge, but is also the source of solution. Because if we act to implement one of them, it is reasonable to assume that we will improve reality in the other areas as well. Persons with disabilities, especially women, face various barriers in accessing sexual and reproductive health services. They violated many articles of the CRPD, such as respect for home and family, the right to health. These are the main, but many other rights, such as equality before the law, in the context of decision-making, articles related to privacy, accessibility, education, risk situation and humanitarian emergencies, and more. As we heard, there are many physical barriers in health facilities that is inaccessible to women with limited mobility, making it difficult or impossible for them to get treatment. Sometimes it's a question of life and death. This includes inaccessible building, treatment rooms, and medical equipment. In many cases, women with disabilities avoid treatment in gynecological clinics, such as mammographic diagnosis, because the device itself is not accessible to women who use wheelchairs and their health is at risk. Additional barrier concerns communication. Healthcare providers do not have the training or skills to communicate effectively with women with hearing or speech disabilities, or to convey the information and guidance in plain language. This can lead to misconceptions or misunderstandings which can affect the quality of care received. Some healthcare providers may hold negative attitudes toward women with disabilities, assuming that they are unable to make decisions about their health or that their medical problems are a result of the disability rather than a separate health problem. Additionally, women with disability often lack access to information about their health or available healthcare services, which can limit their ability to make informed decisions about the treatment. Absurdly, information about them is transferred without their approval between different therapeutic entities, thereby violating the right to privacy. In one of the research I led, we found that men with disabilities who belong to religious or traditional communities, their family encourage them to get married, leave the house, and have children. When it comes to women with disabilities, the perception of them is protective. The family encourages them to stay at home, help mother, certainly not to go out and realize themselves from a material or family point of view. In one of the cases, these were a brother and a sister with the same disability and the same house, of course, and the difference between them in relation was distinct. Many persons with disability often have limited access to education in field and are not aware of the right related to sexual and reproductive health. Many health professionals, as well as policymakers, have limited knowledge and awareness of the specific needs and challenges faced by persons with disabilities regarding sexual and reproductive health. The field should be developed, knowledge should be enriched, and through misconceptions relating to it will also be reduced. It is necessary to develop and enrich variety of tools for healthy sexuality adapted to the intersection of identities. For example, in Israel, they recently developed an educational computer program. It's named Lilach, that deals with visiting women's health clinic, which also emphasize different identities and culture, because in Israel we have many kinds of identities and culture, such as if the woman is religious, what language she speaks, and learning tools in plain language, and those also adapted to persons with cognitive disabilities. Another example is Noam Center. This center specializes in the health of women with physical or medical disabilities. Beyond expertise in the field, the significant thing there is that some of the service providers are women with disabilities themselves. Try to imagine the depth of the discourse, the models that stand in front of those women with disabilities who talk to recipients of the service and confirm to them the concept that they have a right to have better sexual and reproductive health. And yet, there is still a long way to go. To make sexual and reproductive health services available and accessible to persons with disabilities, countries should promote and adopt inclusive policies and strategies that prioritize accessibility to sexual and reproductive health services. Governments should provide adequate training for health professionals who, as mentioned, must include professionals with diverse disabilities in order to provide sexual and reproductive health services in an accessible and inclusive manner everywhere and not only in segregated services. More than that, to engage in regular and meaningful cooperation with disability organizations and persons with disabilities themselves in determining content, planning, implementing, and monitoring sexual and reproductive health services. I will conclude by sharing that, in my view, a person with a disability is not just a human being who needs to be fixed or whose birth should be prevented due to his or her disability. The foundation for advancing our topic relates to recognizing that fact that we are dealing here with the value of human being, the value of his or her life, their right to be born and to live. Sexuality and reproductive health are the foundation of our presence in the world, recognizing that we desire and deserve touch, that our lives is worth the effort to strengthen them, and understanding that without us, both men and women with disabilities, the world will be incomplete. Thank you.
I would like to thank Mrs. Odilia Fitoussi, member of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, for your contribution. Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the second phase of our roundtable, that is the interactive discussion between the panelists and the delegations. There will be opportunities for you to request the floor, to either pose specific questions to specific panelists or make a brief comment relevant to the current discussion. For this purpose, delegates and participants may press the button at your desk to request the floor. On a first-come, first-served basis, we will call and give the floor to the first 5 inscribed member states, whose microphones shall be unmuted when they are given the floor. In order to make our discussion to be inclusive, per decision by the Bureau, after every 5 state parties, we will invite 1 NGO, 1 UN entity, and 1 national human rights institution to take the floor. When you are given the floor, please first identify yourself and the name of the delegation or organization you are representing. Please either pose specific questions or make your brief comments relevant to the current discussion. All interventions may speak no more than 2 minutes. And now the floor is open for inscriptions. Dear delegates, I now recognize the distinguished representative of Singapore as the first in my list and kindly invite you to speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you, panelists, for the rich sharing, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Joan from the Singapore delegation, a youth delegate, as well as a national athlete. My country has taken steps towards making healthcare, including sexual and reproductive health services, affordable and accessible for women and girls with disabilities. There are schemes in place to help women regardless of disabilities defray the cost of both maternal services as well as complications and assisted conceptions. These complications include delivery as well as pregnancy-related complications such as eclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, as well as cervical inconsistencies. Assisted conceptions include artificial insemination as well as in vitro fertilization. Our education system also offers sexual education to help students make informed and responsible choices about sexual matters as well as develop positive self-identities. There are also measures to help identify, address, as well as recognize gender-based violence against women and girls with disabilities, and victims can easily report cases of gender-based violence as well as report gender-based violences as well as receive supportive services. However, persons with disabilities still face a lack of support from families and committees in the areas of sexual and reproductive health services. Therefore, I would like to ask what can be done at the community and family levels.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Singapore, and I now would kindly invite the distinguished representative from Luxembourg.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, co-facilitators. Luxembourg would like to thank the Bureau of the Conference for ensuring the accessibility, promoting accessibility of sexual reproductive health services, which is the topic of this session. I am the PR of Luxembourg to the United Nations, and this is a very important topic to me because I have family members who are living with a disability. We would like to thank you for following up on the request of Luxembourg and several other member states to make this topic the theme of our discussions this year. And I also would like to thank all of the panelists for their suggestions, which were very inspiring. The CRPD guarantees the rights of persons with disabilities to enjoy the best possible state of health, including equality of access to sexual and reproductive health care services. The 186 states parties have committed to respecting these rights, and we encourage them to translate these commitments into the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly. In Luxembourg, we have a national action plan to promote emotional and sexual health, and this addresses the specific needs of individuals. We believe that it is critical to adapt access to sexual and emotional health in order to guarantee accessibility while taking into account individual cases, including age, sexual orientation, and gender identity, as well as disability, inter alia. The CRPD, in its Article 23, confers on persons with disability. Microphone was cut for the speaker.
I would like to thank His Excellency, the distinguished representative from Luxembourg, and I would like now to kindly invite the distinguished representative from the European Union.
To close the gaps in access to healthcare and to improve the health system for persons with disabilities. The EU for Health funding programme can be used to improve and modernise health systems for better accessibility for persons with disabilities. The European Union is supporting mutual learning programmes in gender equality to share best practices, to enhance education and support related initiatives such as sexual and reproductive health rights and contraception and reproductive rights for persons with disabilities. We are working together with Member States to combat harmful practices and to prevent forced sterilisation of women and girls and forced abortion in the European Union. We know that research on the use of sterilisation of persons with disabilities remains scarce. Data is limited and lacks comparability. This is something we would like to tackle. A question to the panel. Given the importance of reducing stigma in order to provide equal access to health care, and especially reproductive and sexual rights, what would the panel propose to ensure proper education and increased awareness? Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of the European Union, and I would like kindly invite the distinguished representative from Sweden.
My name is Maria Mellin, and I'm a natural expert from the Swedish Agency for Participation. And Sweden would very much like to welcome putting these very important issues on the agenda for today's session. As you might know, Sweden have had a long process of strengthening right-based policies, but this has not in practice provided people with disabilities with equal access to sexual and reproductive rights. Discrimination still occurs. And as you are well aware of, sexual rights are closely interlinked with sexual violence and abuse. The agency that I represent have seen by disaggregated data that girls and boys, young women and men, as well as people who identify as trans, intersex or non-binary with disabilities, to a substantially higher extent are subjected to all types of sexual violence compared with similar groups without disabilities. We have also seen that this is true when it comes to online violence, unwanted sexual pictures, sexual abuse, and sexual exploitation. So my question for the panelists would be, how can we design sexual education not only about the very rights to sexual and reproductive health, but also sexual education for our children, for our young people, who fosters self-awareness, self-esteem, and self-empowerment so that they are able to live lives free of violence and with the sexual and reproductive rights and health that they all deserve. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative from Sweden, and I would like now to invite the distinguished representative from Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My name is Alicia Lam, and I'm here on behalf of the Canadian delegation. First, allow me to thank the panelists for the contribution to this very critical discussion on equal access to and accessibility of reproductive health services for persons with disabilities. If we are truly committed to leaving no one behind, we must acknowledge this alarming gap in achieving universal access to sexual and reproductive health services for all. In this regard, Canada has and will continue to be a champion for the human rights of women and girls in all of their diversity, including those with disabilities. At its 47th session, Canada once again led the Human Rights Council resolution on violence against women and girls, whose focus on preventing and responding to violence against women and girls with disabilities led to the important recognition of the heightened risk of sexual and gender-based violence and the specific barriers that stand in the way of reporting violence, seeking justice, and accessing services, including health services. Progress in sexual and reproductive rights requires acknowledging and addressing the barriers embedded in laws, policies, and social norms and values, especially around gender inequality, that prevents people from achieving sexual and reproductive health. And this is particularly relevant when we recognize the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that persons with disabilities face. Mr. Chair, my question to the panel relates to digital tools. These are crucial tools that allow persons with disabilities to have autonomy over their own bodies and to decide freely over matters relating to their sexuality. However, very few digital tools exist for women and girls' health services, including sexual and reproductive health services, despite a growing demand and the unmet need for them. What are some best practices that we can employ to make such tools more accessible and to bring persons with disabilities to the table?
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Canada. And now, distinguished representative, dear colleagues, I would like to invite the first NGO who has asked for the floor, the European Disability Forum, inviting its representative to speak. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. It's my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of European Disability Forum. I am Gunta Anka, the Vice President of European Disability Forum. We are regional members of AIDA, and we are an umbrella organization of persons with disabilities composed to defend the rights of over 100 million persons with disabilities in Europe. I'd like to stress how important it is not only to ensure equal access and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities, but also to ensure their fundamental rights to make decisions on their own body, on their own sexuality, on their reproductive health. Yesterday, European Disability Forum co-organized a side event on forced sterilization and sexual and reproductive health and rights. During that event, we explained how forced sterilization and contraception still affect the life of many persons with disabilities, especially women. This cannot continue. Our bodies are our rights. It is 2023, and we cannot accept women being sterilized without their knowledge, without their free and informed permission, or under the pressure of society. Not only forced sterilization has permanent consequences on the physical and mental health of victims, it also facilitates sexual violence and rape. when offenders know that victims will not get pregnant. Enough is enough. Today, European Disability Forum calls for a ban of forced sterilization of persons with disabilities and encourages the state parties to come together and to join a global action. Such initiatives should be also a commitment to fight stereotypes and to ensure better access to sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities, including those still segregated in institutions. Thank you so much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of the European Disability Forum. And dear colleagues, now that we have received some comments and questions from the floor, I would like to turn to our distinguished panelists to respond to questions raised or comments received. Each panelist, please speak for about 2 minutes. I would like to start from Anderson. Anderson, you have 2 minutes to give your reply.
Presidente, muchas gracias. Delegado.
Thank you, Chairman, delegates. I think something important here. The bodies of people with disabilities, our bodies have been exhibited, have been public bodies, have been bodies that have been desired, touched, and made public by medicine, by the healthcare system, and now our combat is focused in the area of performance and art to really promote our rights in terms of reproductive health and sexual health. And to reduce the stigmas and taboos, we need to speak of sexual disabilities also. And what's most important here is to mention education, legal capacity, and accessibility. Those are the 3 pillars that will make it possible to effectively enjoy our sexual and reproductive rights. Of course, mentioning that the sexuality of persons with disabilities not to be reduced to reproductive practice, but also practice based on pleasure. And I would repeat that we need to look at art, as has already been done, and look at these occult images or in cinema. They're very interesting experiences that could help us mobilize society. And of course, here it's important to think of children with disabilities and the sexual violence that has been noted. We need to work to eliminate that. And speaking of sexual disabilities, not to enable sexual violence. Quite to the contrary, it's to find ways and protocols of avoiding this kind of violence. Often, sometimes medical violence, institutional violences, because, for example, sterilization and other violent practices by the state have occurred, and we need to make sure that this kind of violence is not perpetrated against, especially against women and girls with disabilities. And I would, in conclusion, say that to discuss this in a forum such as the United Nations is a huge step forward, especially to recognize and respect these other different forms of feeling and expressing love and feeling your bodies. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson Henao Rothko. I now invite Mrs. Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes to make her response.
Presidente, está prendido, ¿no?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try to be as brief as possible on the various topics here. First of all, the awareness, as we understand it, in the framework of the convention that's based on the family, on school, on the media, to do away with all kinds of stereotypes and damaging practices as those described here. That is the first thing. The second thing is to really focus on the educational system, because this is part of the cross-cutting goals of education is to the respect for personal identity of other people, of the other people who has a body that's different, and this has to be part of continuous education of children, of teenagers, both those with and without disabilities. Let's recall that in bullying, most of those targeted are girls and boys with disabilities, and also they're the targets of sexual abuse. Thirdly, someone asked, what can we do? Well, we can try to work through the political system. We need to work using the CPRD to try to encourage the political systems to effect the necessary legal changes in order to harmonize policies and legislation. And lastly, what I'd like to say is that any action that is done against the consent of an individual is a crime. Therefore, if there's forced sterilization, forced abortion, or any other kind of use of the body of another person, a person with disability, that is without that person's consent, this is a crime, and therefore these should be these should be denounced and brought to the courts as such. Thank you very much.
I now invite Mrs. Leila Sharafi to take the floor.
Thank you so much for the questions and reflections. Perhaps I'll just respond to the question about sexuality education, comprehensive sexuality education from Sweden. You know, in UNFPA and with partners including UNESCO and others, what we say often is that if it's comprehensive sexuality education, it goes beyond biology, it goes beyond just health. It really talks about promoting awareness among young people, empowerment, confidence. It teaches respect among the genders. It teaches equality. So it's really beyond just biology. And this is something that's really important to keep in mind, and why it's so important that we talk about the comprehensive sexuality education, and there are standards for what that curricula should look like. But more specifically, as I mentioned in my intervention, UNFPA has developed several training packages for both teachers and administrators in education sectors, community workers who connect with children and young people with disabilities. And one example is this Breaking the Silence package that we've been rolling out in East and Southern Africa. And part of that, and actually it's framed by guidance we've developed for out-of-school youth. And specifically, we've developed modules that focus on young people with disabilities, whether that's physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing, blind, autism spectrum disorder, psychosocial. So I think that there are tools out there and there are methodologies. I think the point is really to scale up and to get the support of member states and government buy-in so that it really can reach a wide range of young people. And finally, if you'll allow me, Chair, I would like to also respond to the remark from Canada about the importance of digital tools, and we can agree with you more. We see the proliferation of technology and digitalization, and sometimes it's unsafe and not ethical. And so we've developed as UNFPA guidelines for technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And one of the things that we've been developing with some partners in Indonesia is a module on working on that very safety for young people who are deaf and thinking about all of the imagery, all of the potential risk that they face online. In Ecuador, one of the tools we've developed is a website for young people with disabilities where they can find specific information and resources on sexual and reproductive health and rights. But it's a long road ahead, and certainly these tools really need to be upscaled. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Sharafi. I now invite Professor Nora Gross to speak.
Thank you. There's no easy answer to this, and while even for the overarching the full population, we talk broadly about sexual and reproductive rights. In fact, to address sexual and reproductive rights for any person or any group, we break it down into children, adults, people who have men, women, educational resources, how to train doctors, nurses, people providing community health services. There's no reason why people with disabilities are any less complicated. And we need to make sure, I guess I would suggest both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. The top-down is to look at any sexual and reproductive health services, whether it's breast cancer screening or educating children in junior high school or reaching the gay population, on anything that goes to reach sexual and reproductive health. The question we should be asking is, are people with disabilities included, not just included, but included at equal rates? Are they being effectively reached? And are they pleased with the information they're getting, or do they think other things are needed? So we should go make sure that every sexual and reproductive health service out there is disability inclusive. And then we also need to go bottom up and look at what is being available that's specifically targeted to people with disabilities, to groups with disabilities, and often to the hardest reached members of the disability community. So the issue is not to come up with a quick, glib, we need to reach everyone. Places like UNFPA have a number of excellent programs in themselves and programs that can be models in a number of countries. But it's really up, in some ways, it's up to us to break down these big chunks of approaches and say, where is my organization or my expertise or my influence, where can I start to make a difference? Then we can come together and review on a regular basis whether people with disabilities are being reached at equal rates and where there are still gaps in the system. But it's very important not to just, when you start with, all sexual and reproductive health rights for all people with disabilities, it's sometimes so, there's so much to be done that I think we discourage governments and others from getting involved. So again, if this was easy, we would have solved it already. But I think it's important to start wherever you are as an organization, as an individual, whatever your expertise is, and start looking and seeing where you can do more. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Professor Gross. I now invite Mr. Hanjabam to take the floor. The floor is yours.
Yeah, because I work a lot around stigma and discrimination, I'd just like to add something on that. It's like, for me, because I have lived in the community most of the time, the inability to accept my true self really killed me twice. And that has been the biggest problem for everyone who lives with a health condition or a disability. So the thing that I really do in our organization, in our work, is that it is not we who are wrong, it is the society who is wrong. They are the one who didn't create a safe space for us. They are the one who didn't make the society inclusive. They make you ashamed of your existence. So if you look into it, we are not the one who are wrong. The one who are wrong is the society. So they think that you are not capable to be inclusive and to be loved. But definitely, we have been always called vulnerable. We also consider vulnerability as a weakness. But for me, I have used my vulnerability to reclaim our spaces. Consider your vulnerability as your power, because fear breeds stigma and discrimination. So not to be afraid of ourselves is the first step to break the stigma and discrimination in the society. And another thing which I wanted to add, when one of our excellencies were talking about forced sterilization, there is something called forced conversion therapy that happens within the LGBTI community, and that is something which we need to take very seriously also. And also about creating the safer spaces, one thing which we have done in conflict regions to talk about sexual health and reproductive health and mental health is to use sports, because that is something which people have not used, but how we use sports and playgrounds to talk about inclusion, to talk about health and many other things, because we cannot sit in rooms and do all these talkings, because many people look across us and see a group of people who are trying to break the society. So somehow we have tried to neutralize and reclaim playgrounds and stadiums. And we have an initiative called Queer Games, which is the LGBTI sports festival, which we have been doing from last 5 years, and that has helped us a lot. So it is more about creating more support systems and safe spaces to reclaim our spaces. Thank you.
I would like to thank Mr. Hajabam. And now, distinguished delegates, we can open the floor for a second round of short comments. I would like to recognize and give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Australia.
Thank you very much. My name is Amanda Rishworth. I'm the Minister for Social Services from Australia. And I would like to thank very much this discussion. It's an incredibly important discussion. And thank the panellists for your really important insights. I think Australia is absolutely committed to supporting, protecting and promoting the sexual and reproductive health and rights of Australians, but of course people around the world. And importantly, as part of that, it needs to include people with disability. And I'd like to thank the panel particularly for talking about how important it is for this issue, not just to be embedded in disability policy, but right across all policies and strategies of government. And of course, the Australian government has been doing this. One of our key strategies is our National Women's Health Strategy, which does elevate sexual and reproductive rights of Australian women, but has identified women and girls with disability as a priority group. In addition, our national strategy to end violence against end gender-based violence has been a critical area in which we have identified women with disability as particularly vulnerable, as well as LGBTIQA+ people, and as innovated strategies. But I would also like to say we are committed as a country to working internationally in our international engagement on this. And I would like to recognise the work with our Pacific friends, particularly Vanuatu, Tonga and Samoa. Through the research we've done, that research has been led by people with disabilities and has led to recommendations that are being enacted. And I think it is important, and thank the panel for discussing the importance of research but also implementation. And I guess
I would like to thank Her Excellency, the Distinguished Representative of Australia, and now I recognize and I would like to give the floor to the Distinguished Delegate of Liberia.
Yeah, thank you so much. And my comment have to do with the comment from one of the speakers where he talked about the intentional exclusion of persons with disabilities. Like the speaker said, more often we have talked about all of these, but at a county level, at a country level, there's a need that we sit as decision-making persons to make decisions that affect our life. We are not saying there's no need for disability expert, but nothing about us without us shows that when we are present, we will exactly articulate those issues that affect our lives. In many countries, we have National Commission on Disability. In some countries, those National Commission on Disability are not functional, but they are under ministries and agencies, and each time there's a need to come to the UN to make presentation, they are not even part of the delegations. They are not even head of the delegations. If we are saying all of these, then where are we going? We will just be in circles and saying the same thing. So let's be intentional in what we do. Let persons with disability be around the table. We are educated, we are good, we are beautiful, we can talk about our issue. Thank you, and thank you so much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Liberia, and now I recognize that I would like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Guyana.
Chair, I am Dr. Ariane Mangar, Guyana's delegate, Director of Disability and Rehab. The government of Guyana has developed a sexual and rehab reproductive health policy which ensures that persons with disabilities enjoy their rights and access to sexual and reproductive health care services on equal basis. Robust efforts are made to improve access to sexual and reproductive health care services at the national and community levels through advocacy and awareness raising campaigns. The campaigns aim to reduce stigma and discrimination against persons with disabilities, as well as enhance knowledge on disability issues and promote the importance of inclusive and accessible services. Chair, in order to ensure access to rural and hinterland areas, mobile health outreach teams provide healthcare services, including sexual and reproductive health care. Healthcare workers in the rural and hinterland areas are trained on communication techniques, physical accessibility, and adapting medical equipment and procedures in delivering accessible and inclusive healthcare services to persons with disabilities. Additionally, the Guyana Council of Persons with Disabilities and Adolescent Health Unit has been working in various communities to ensure that the services provided are responsive to the needs and preferences of persons with disability. Most recently, the government launched the telemedicine program and digital health solutions to provide remote consultations and follow-up care. Chair, we must always be mindful that designing and delivering healthcare services for persons with disabilities require a holistic and collaborative approach which involves multiple stakeholders and take into consideration.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Guyana, and now I'm giving the floor to the distinguished delegate of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Women with disabilities confront unique challenges and barriers that could limit their access to reproductive and sexual services. This is why Uruguay is moving forward and implementing a pilot plan of a support system so that women with disabilities can exercise their right to reproductive health, especially in regard to maternity and raising children. This public policy is focused on early childhood and particularly focusing on women with disability. There are a large number of cases with women with disabilities that are cataloged by healthcare professionals as high-risk pregnancies, and they could lose, in fact, custody of their children because these healthcare professionals draft reports that have an impact then on the decisions of custody. This is why this is particularly for psychosocial disabilities. And so we're particularly focusing on gender violence also. We will have professionals supporting women with disabilities that will be part of the pilot project, in particular focusing on maternity and raising children. The results of this project will be analyzed, and lessons learned will be implemented. We in this task have had the support of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General on Disability and Accessibility, as well as the Population Fund. We believe that the experience during the panel clearly shows multiple and interconnected forms of discrimination that Uruguay is trying to deal with.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay, and I would like to call now the distinguished representative of Finland.
Dear attendees and all the parties, I am Anni Tekman and I represent Finland and National Association for Women with Disabilities, Roset. I speak here today especially with the voice of women with disabilities. As we all know, the biggest obstacle of the realization of sexual rights is old-fashioned attitudes, lack of information, inaccessibility of sexual health and family services, and ignorance of the professionals. So, how can we promote sexual rights? Two examples of what has been done in Finland to promote this topic. One of the most effective ways is to incorporate sexual rights of people with disabilities into national law. This year, for the first time, assistive devices for sexual life were recorded in Finland as part of the national guidelines for donating medical rehabilitation aids. This means Finland has recognized the sexuality of people with disabilities at the level of the law. In this way, Finland has successfully promoted among professionals the awareness of the rights and needs of persons with disabilities to access to sexual and reproductive health services. This entry has been very well received by persons with disabilities in Finland. Another effective way is to create a clear and accessible guidebook on the subject, for example, the motherhood of women with disabilities. Most countries, including Finland, have general guidelines and guidebooks about motherhood and pregnancy, but they rarely take account for disability characteristics. The guidebooks should be complied in cooperation with professionals and people with disabilities to ensure that the guide serves everyone as effectively as possible. In 2022, our organization Rosette published the first guidebook of this topic, which brings together.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Finland, and I would like now to recognize and call the distinguished representative of the Pacific Disability Forum. We go to the next NGO who has already asked for the floor, the World Blind Union. You may have the floor. We move on to the Women with Disability Australia.
Hello everyone, my name is Margherita Dallocco Vaccaro and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Women with Disabilities Australia. To begin, we cannot have a proper discussion without considering the impact of multiple and intersecting disadvantages in accessing and enjoying our full health, sexual and reproductive rights. We cannot have this conversation without fully acknowledging the racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and other forms of discrimination on top of ableism faced by those trying to access services or support. Our right to sexual and reproductive health services, education, and to make our own choices is a right which begins at childhood and continues with us through puberty, into adulthood, through parenthood, and beyond. As people with disabilities, we are often not afforded this right. In 2022, we ran a survey to understand the sexual reproductive rights, needs, and wants of young women, girls, and gender-diverse people. We found that a significant number of these women, girls, and gender-diverse people are not making their own choices when it comes to contraception, sex, menstruation, and other basic health services. To move forward and advance these rights, we need accessible, disability-specific information which considers various cultural and contextual factors. We need privacy when accessing sexual and reproductive health care, and we need to break the stigma on teaching people with disabilities about our bodies, our needs, our rights, and our wants. We need to have stronger discussions and take stronger and bigger steps to realize these rights. We will continue to experience abuse, trauma, and violence through sexual and reproductive health services or by carers and guardians if we do not take stronger action. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Women with Disability Australia, and I would like to turn to our distinguished panelists to respond to questions raised. I would start again from Anderson. Anderson, you may take the floor.
Ya, ok. No, yo voy a...
I'll respond to comments with a very brief poem, anonymous poem. It says something like this. It's possible that a person with disability does not enjoy certain things, but that does not mean that they cannot enjoy the rest. It's possible that feet do not feel, but lips, breasts, and hands can feel. It's not possible that a person doesn't see, but they can hear and touch and even savor. It's possible that you can love in different ways, that attraction can be expressed and desire can be expressed in different ways, when the ways of expressing and feeling are different. But even in spite of that, you can still love and desire. It's possible that support of third persons can be important for some people, that with consent and by choice, individual choice, absolute individual choice, they might desire it that way. Thank you.
I would like now to invite Mrs. Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes to make her response.
Chairman, very briefly, I want to say, knowing the situation, that the experience of Uruguay as far as support for women with disability has demonstrated to be very innovative and successful, and it's worth observing. That is my comment, because this is a very concrete experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, in this roundtable we heard about the many attitudinal and environmental barriers that persons with disabilities face in assessing sexual and reproductive health services, including discrimination and stigma, misperceptions of their sexual and reproductive health needs, lack of accessibility of information, premises and transport, forced sterilization, obstetrical and sexual violence and abuse. Panelists highlighted the need to involve persons with disabilities in the design and implementation of sexual and reproductive health policies, protocols and services, and to have better oversight of the implementation of laws. They have also stressed the need to realize all rights of persons with disabilities, drawing attention in particular to the right to have control over decisions concerning their sexuality and reproduction, and the right to accessibility and education. Esteemed delegates, dear colleagues, it was very encouraging to hear about initiatives to remove the barriers for persons with disabilities, like the use of sign languages in sexual and reproductive health services, training of staff working in these services, use of equipment with universal design features, accessible online sexual and reproductive services, supporting the costs of reproductive services for women with disabilities, establishing support services for victims of gender-based violence, and disability data advocacy workshops. Thank you all for a very productive discussion, sharing concrete solutions. Dear delegates, Savaira and I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists in the roundtable, all delegates and participants from the civil society and the United Nations system for your valuable contributions. I wish to acknowledge with sincere thanks the capable support and service of the Secretariat, notably you and DESA, and all our interpreters, card service providers, and sign language interpreters, among many others, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes and helped to deliver this successful discussion. I would like on that note, to reiterate that this was the very first time this very important issue, ensuring equal access to and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities, have been discussed during the conference. I would also like to remind all speakers to consider sending their statements to e-statements@un.org for posting in the UN Journal no later than 2 hours after delivery, if you may wish to do so. With this, I announce the Roundtable 1 meeting is now formally concluded. Thank you very much.